The letter arrived at Buckingham Palace on a Tuesday morning, sealed in a plain cream envelope with no official crest. That was the first sign something unusual was happening. A senior aide reportedly received it just before 9 o'clock and immediately recognized the handwriting on the outer fold, precise, angular, unmistakably deliberate. He did not open it. He carried it directly upstairs without stopping, without speaking to anyone he passed in the corridor. Those present described him walking faster than usual. Not running, but close. Inside the king's private study, the atmosphere was already heavy. According to sources close to the household, Charles had been awake since before dawn. He had been sitting at his desk with a single lamp burning when the envelope was placed in front of him. He looked at it for a long moment. Then he picked it up, broke the seal himself, and read. What was inside that letter reportedly changed the tone of the entire day. By 10 o'clock, 3 separate aides had been summoned. By 11, a senior royal legal advisor had been quietly asked to attend the palace. And by noon, according to multiple accounts, Princess Anne had arrived. She did not announce her visit in advance. She did not come through the ceremonial entrance. Those present described her arriving through a side corridor that bypasses the main reception hall entirely, the kind of entrance used when someone does not wish to be seen arriving and does not intend to leave quietly. If you have followed this channel for even a short while, you already know that when Princess Anne arrives somewhere unannounced, something significant is about to happen. So before we go any further, if you haven't already, subscribe now and turn on your notifications. Because what happened inside that palace on that Tuesday is a story this audience has been waiting years to hear. Anne entered the study and closed the door behind her. What followed, according to a documented account from someone in close proximity to the household, lasted approximately 40 minutes. There were no raised voices. That itself was noted. When decisions of this kind are made inside palace walls, the quieter the room, the more serious the intent. When the door opened again, Anne walked out first. She did not pause. She did not speak to the staff in the corridor. She simply moved toward the exit with the same precision she had carried in. Behind her, the legal advisor remained with the king for another hour. By that evening, 5 names had been formally removed from a list that had stood reportedly unchallenged for nearly 3 years. 5 names, all of them connected in various ways to the Parker Bowles family. The official explanation, when it eventually filtered through palace channels, was brief and administrative in tone. A routine review of honorary appointments and affiliated institutional roles. Sources described it as a procedural update. Nothing more. But the timing told a different story. Because 3 days before that Tuesday morning, a private document had reportedly been brought to Anne's attention. Not by a palace official, not through any formal channel. According to those familiar with the matter, it was brought to her by someone she trusted, someone who had been carrying the information for weeks, uncertain of what to do with it, uncertain of whether anyone with the authority to act on it would actually choose to do so. Anne apparently read it the same night it was delivered to her. And the following morning, she reportedly called her brother. What was in that document and what it revealed about the way the Parker Bowles name had been positioned within royal institutional life over the preceding years is the part of this story that the palace has never publicly addressed. But sources close to the household suggest it was not new information entirely. It was confirmation. It was the kind of confirmation that turns a suspicion into a record. The kind that cannot be unseen once a person with genuine authority has seen it. Charles, by all accounts, read it the same day Anne called. He did not respond immediately. He is not, by nature, a man who moves quickly when the consequences are large. But 3 days later, the letter was written. 3 days later, Anne was at the palace. And 3 days later, 5 names were gone. What no one inside those walls expected, what reportedly stunned even those who had quietly hoped for exactly this outcome, was the 6th name, the one that was removed last. After Anne had already left the building, the one that nobody had put on the original list at all. To understand why that 6th name mattered so much, you have to go back, not to that Tuesday, not even to the months immediately before it. You have to go back to a period that most royal observers rarely discuss openly, the quiet years between Diana's death and Charles's remarriage, when the question of how the Parker Bowles family would eventually be positioned within the institution was still, officially, unresolved. Diana died in August 1997. The world knows that. What the world has spoken about less is what happened in the years immediately following, specifically, the slow and deliberate process by which Camilla Parker Bowles moved from being a figure the palace refused to publicly acknowledge to one who eventually stood beside the king at state occasions, received a formal title, and watched her family accumulate a quiet but significant collection of honorary roles and institutional affiliations. It did not happen overnight. That is the part worth understanding. According to sources familiar with the internal dynamics of the royal household during that period, the process was careful, incremental. Each step was small enough to avoid drawing a sharp public reaction. A photograph here, a formal introduction there, a gradual softening of language in official communications, and alongside it, almost invisibly, a parallel process, the extension of that social rehabilitation to members of Camilla's wider family circle. By the time Charles and Camilla married in April 2005, a foundation had already been laid, and in the years that followed, according to multiple reports, that foundation was quietly built upon honorary positions, charitable affiliations, institutional roles that carried the prestige of royal adjacency without requiring formal palace approval at the highest level. The kind of appointments that accumulate slowly, attract little scrutiny individually, and collectively amount to something considerably more significant than any single role would suggest. 5 members of the Parker Bowles family had, over time, come to hold positions of varying weight within organizations that carried either royal warrants, royal patronages, or direct institutional links to the crown. None of it was secret, precisely. It was simply never gathered together and examined as a whole. Until someone did exactly that. The document that reached Anne was reportedly the work of a single individual, not a political operative, not a journalist, and not anyone with an institutional axe to grind. According to those familiar with its origins, it was assembled by a former palace staffer who had grown increasingly uncomfortable with what they had observed during their years of service. Someone who had watched the accumulation happen in real time and had eventually decided, quietly and without fanfare, to put it all in one place. What the document contained was not allegations, it was not accusations. It was, by all accounts, a straightforward record. Dates, names, roles, the organizations involved, the manner in which each appointment had been processed. And most critically, a section at the end that traced the pattern across time, laid it out clearly, and asked a single question that the document itself did not answer. Whether any of this had been done with the full knowledge and explicit approval of the king. That question was the heart of it, because if Charles had personally authorized each of these appointments, then what had happened was simply a husband using his position to benefit his wife's family, uncomfortable, perhaps, but not without precedent in royal history. But if he had not, if some or all of these positions had been secured through channels that bypassed the king's direct attention, then the picture was considerably more serious. Anne, according to sources, read the document in its entirety in a single sitting. She did not share her immediate reaction with anyone that night, but those close to her noted that she canceled 2 engagements the following morning. And by midday, she had placed the call to Charles. What passed between them in that conversation has not been fully disclosed, but a senior aide later noted carefully, and without elaborating, that the king had not been aware of the full scope of what the document described. That detail is important, because it means that when Charles sat down at his desk 3 days later and read the letter Anne had effectively prompted him to write, he was not acting from a place of reluctant acknowledgement. He was acting from something closer to resolve. The resolve of a man who had been shown something he could not comfortably set aside. He had spent years navigating the tension between his personal life and his institutional responsibilities. He had asked the public and the institution to accept Camilla. Many had, in time, many had not. But this was different. This was not about public opinion. This was about the integrity of appointments made in the shadow of the crown. And Charles, whatever his other complexities, has never been described as a man willing to allow that particular line to remain uncorrected once it has been clearly shown to him. Anne knew that. It is, according to those who understand their relationship, precisely why she called him, rather than acting independently. She brought him the information. She let him reach his own conclusion. And then she came to the palace to stand beside him when he acted on it. What she did not know, what reportedly no one had anticipated, was the name that Charles added himself after she had gone. The name that was not on any list. the name that had never been formally attached to any royal-adjacent role, the name that Charles removed quietly, without explanation, from something far more private than an honorary appointment, and that removal, sources suggest, was the one that Camilla did not see coming. Camilla learned what had happened the same evening, not from Charles, not from a palace official. According to sources close to the household, she learned it the way people in that world often learn the things that matter most, through the sudden, conspicuous silence of someone who would normally have been in contact. One of her closest family members had not received an expected call from a liaison at a charitable organization they were affiliated with. A routine confirmation, the kind that comes through quietly, reliably, without fanfare. It did not come. And when a discreet inquiry was made, the response that came back was brief and final. The appointment had been reviewed. It would not be continuing. By the time Camilla understood the full scope of what had happened, 5 names, 5 removals, all processed and completed before the afternoon was out, the palace had already moved on administratively. There was no meeting scheduled, no formal explanation offered, no invitation to discuss the matter through any channel. That, according to those familiar with how the institution operates, was itself a message. When the palace wants to signal that a decision is open to dialogue, it leaves a door ajar. A call is expected. A follow-up is implied. The language used in formal communications carries just enough softness to suggest that the conversation is not entirely over. None of that softness was present here. Camilla reportedly requested a private meeting with Charles that same evening. According to sources, she was told he was unavailable. She requested again the following morning. She was told his schedule was committed through the week. For a woman who had spent 2 decades learning to navigate the institution on its own terms, who had mastered the art of patience, of strategic stillness, of waiting for the right moment rather than forcing the wrong one, this was not simply a setback. This was a signal she understood completely. What happened in the days that followed has been described, by those with knowledge of the household's atmosphere during that period, as one of the most quietly tense stretches in recent royal memory. Not dramatic, not visible to the public, but present in every room, in every corridor conversation that stopped a beat too soon, in every carefully worded briefing that said slightly less than usual. Anne returned to her own residence. She gave no interviews. She made no public statements. She attended 2 previously scheduled engagements and conducted herself, by all external appearances, entirely as normal. Those who know her well have noted that this is precisely how she behaves when she considers a matter closed. No elaboration, no performance of victory, simply the quiet continuation of duty. It was William who eventually spoke. Not publicly, not in any format that reached the press, but according to sources close to the family, he requested his own private meeting with his father during that same week. And unlike Camilla's requests, his was accommodated within 24 hours. What passed between them in that meeting is not fully known. But those with insight into William's state of mind during that period have described him as someone who had been watching the accumulation of Parker Bowles' influence within royal adjacent spaces for longer than he had ever directly addressed. Someone who had chosen, repeatedly, to prioritize institutional stability over personal grievance. But something had shifted. It is said that William came to that meeting not with anger, but with a kind of clarity that those close to him had not seen before. He had spent years absorbing the weight of Diana's absence while watching the institution that had struggled to protect her gradually extend its warmth to the family most associated with her pain. He had done so without public complaint. He had done so out of loyalty to his father and out of genuine commitment to the crown he would one day inherit. What he said to Charles in that room, reportedly, was not a demand. It was not an ultimatum. It was something quieter and, in many ways, considerably more powerful than either. He told his father that he was grateful. That single word, according to those familiar with the exchange, carried the full weight of everything that had preceded it. Years of restraint, years of watching, years of trusting that the institution would, in time, correct itself. And now, finally, evidence that it had. Charles, by all accounts, did not respond immediately. He looked at his son for a long moment, and then, according to those present, he said something that William has reportedly carried with him since. He said that some decisions take longer than they should, but that the ones worth making always find their moment. It was after that meeting that the 6th name was confirmed. not announced, not documented in any public record, but confirmed through the kind of quiet institutional acknowledgement that the palace uses when it wants something understood without being stated. The sixth name belonged to someone who had never held a formal role, never appeared on any official list, but who had, according to sources, been quietly positioned as a future beneficiary of a specific private arrangement, one that touched not honorary appointments, not charitable affiliations, but something considerably closer to the heart of the institution itself. The nature of that arrangement has not been fully disclosed, but sources describe it as something that, had it proceeded, would have carried implications for how certain private royal assets and legacy decisions were ultimately structured. Charles removed that name himself, alone, without consulting Anne, without informing William in advance. And when William learned of it, reportedly through a brief, factual note, delivered the following day, he read it once, set it down, and did not speak about it to anyone for the remainder of that afternoon. Those who were nearby described him standing at a window for a long time, looking out, saying nothing, but present in a way that felt, to those watching, less like grief and more like something being quietly, finally, laid to rest. 3 weeks after that Tuesday, a small and entirely private moment took place at Kensington Palace. It was not scheduled, it was not arranged by staff. According to sources close to the household, it happened the way the most meaningful moments in that family often do, quietly, without ceremony, in the space between one obligation and the next. William was with Charlotte. She had been working on something at a table near the window, a project of some kind, the specific details of which have not been shared publicly. William came in, sat beside her, and for a while said nothing. He simply watched her work. Those present described the atmosphere as entirely ordinary, warm, unhurried. And then Charlotte looked up and asked her father a question. She asked him whether the people who had hurt their family had ever been made to face what they had done. William was quiet for a moment. Not the silence of someone searching for words, the silence of someone choosing them carefully. He told her yes. Not always quickly, not always loudly, but yes. Charlotte considered that for a moment. Then she returned to what she was doing. That exchange, brief as it was, has stayed with those who were present. Because in that single question from a child who carries Diana's eyes and, by all accounts, something of Diana's instinct for the truth beneath the surface, there was something that no formal announcement, no institutional document, and no palace briefing could have captured. The understanding that justice, when it comes, does not always arrive with fanfare. Sometimes it arrives on a Tuesday morning in a cream envelope. Sometimes it arrives in the quiet removal of a name that most people never knew was there. And sometimes it arrives in the answer a father gives his daughter at a table near a window when no one important is watching. Diana would have understood that. Those who knew her well have long described her as someone who never confused visibility with significance. She understood that the moments that genuinely change things are rarely the ones that make the front pages. They are the ones that happen in private, between people who know what they mean, in rooms where the cameras cannot reach. What happened across those weeks, from the letter, to Anne's arrival, to the 5 names, to the 6th, to the meeting between a father and his son, was not a public reckoning. It will likely never be framed as one. The institution does not operate that way, and those who understand it best do not expect it to. But something real shifted. Something that had been building for years, quietly and without resolution, finally moved. The Parker Bowles presence within royal-adjacent institutional life is, according to sources, now considerably reduced from what it was. The appointments are gone. The private arrangement that had been quietly taking shape has been dissolved. And the man who dissolved it did so not under public pressure, not in response to media scrutiny, but because his daughter brought him a document. His son sat across from him and said a single word, and he chose finally, deliberately, irreversibly to act. Anne has not commented publicly. She will not. That is not her way and never has been. But those who know her well have noted that she has seemed, in the weeks since, characteristically settled. Not triumphant, not relieved, simply resolved. The way a person looks when something they believed in has been confirmed by events. William has continued his public duties with the same measured composure that has defined his recent years. But sources close to him describe a quiet change in his bearing, something difficult to name precisely, but visible to those paying attention, as though a weight he had carried without acknowledging it has been, not removed entirely, but redistributed, shared at last with the institution that should always have been carrying part of it alongside him. Catherine, throughout all of it, remained the still point. She always does. Those close to her describe a woman who has learned through years of pressure that would have broken someone less grounded to hold her position without grasping and to trust without demanding proof. She knew what was happening. She said little. She was present in the ways that mattered and absent from the parts that did not require her. That, too, is a form of strength that Diana modeled, and that Catherine has made entirely her own. The institution moves slowly. It always has. It protects itself first and corrects itself second, and the gap between those two impulses can stretch across years, sometimes decades. The people inside it who care most about its integrity are often the ones who must wait longest for it to reflect their values back at them. But it does correct. Quietly. Imperfectly. In cream envelopes in closed rooms, and conversations between a father and his son that no press briefing will ever fully capture. Diana spent her life believing that the truth, given enough time and enough courage, finds its way through. On a Tuesday morning, in a room with a single lamp burning, it did. What do you think was Charles finally acting from genuine conscience? Or did it take Anne and William together to make this moment possible? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, give it a like and subscribe to Thrown in Tears for more. Every week, the stories this audience deserves to hear. Diana's legacy endures, not in titles, not in institutions, in the people she raised to know the difference.